Make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
So I'm Dave Belden, and I'm the managing editor of this magazine. I'm holding it up as advertising. I hope that you can have empathy for my desire to do that. It's a great magazine, and we've written quite a lot about empathy. It's one of our major themes. And so you may hear from my accent. I'm originally from England. I've been here for, let's see, 1981. I came for, I think, 2 weeks, and I fell in love with a woman living in San Francisco, and I've been here or other parts of America ever since. And I've been at Tikkun for about 3 years. So I think what I'm really interested in, actually, is how to do conflict with empathy. Because I think if we're still going to have a civilization worth having in 100 years, there's going to be a great deal of conflict between now and then. We actually have to deal with global warming, and we have to deal with many, many issues. And there are a lot of people who are going to resist it. And what kind of conflict is it going to be? It seems to me that the people I know who are really into empathy, and empathy as a practice, shy away from the whole concept of conflict. It seems like it's too hard to put those two things together. That empathy seems to involve empathic communication, really trying to understand the other person, but not working out how to actually fight the other person empathically. That's just a hard thing to work out. I'm not even sure. But when you look at Martin Luther King, when you look at Gandhi, they promoted conflict. They didn't, I mean, the conflict was, in a sense, there already, in the sense that there was the British Empire oppressing India, there was the African Americans without rights, but you can sit down under that, you can be empathic towards the people who are oppressing you, or you can get up and fight it. And both of those famous nonviolent organizers actually found ways to push the conflict to resolution, and at the same time, by showing empathy for the oppressor and by their own nonviolence, they were able to, I guess you could say, to gain the moral high ground, if you want to do it in sort of conflict terminology, or actually to shame the other side. I mean, however that is. But also, I think it's more than that. I think when you have the empathy, you actually make the connection, the human heart-to-heart connection. And people, white Americans, looked at black Americans, and for many of them, for the first time, they thought, these are people. My British forebears looked at the Indians and maybe understood them as people like themselves in some sense. So that's what you can do with the empathy. But if you're not going to get into the conflict, then things are not actually going to change fast enough.
So you're saying don't avoid the conflict, but go to the conflict with empathy?
Yes, and with nonviolence. So how do you do conflict? I think there's people find it easier to think about doing empathy than doing conflict with empathy. It's either one or the other. If you get into a conflict, the empathy goes out the window. So I don't know.
So you're saying people say that, oh, empathy, we all have to be nice.
Yes, yes. I want to put the conflict back into nonviolent conflict, because I think that without that, justice actually doesn't happen, and the world will not be saved, if that's not too strong a word.
Is there somewhere where this is played out in your own life?
I've always been in the middle, I think. I was raised in an intense religious movement that was involved in conflict resolution, and I came to disagree with quite a lot of its practices and beliefs, and it was heavily criticized by other people, and I was always defending it to its critics, and I was always criticizing it to its face. So in other words, I often seem to find myself in between two bunches of people who are in conflict, and I sort of feel for both sides, and I try and be this ridiculous person who gets in the middle and says, but don't you understand, but don't you understand? So that's just been my personal path. I don't know that I've been particularly good at it, but that seems to be where I keep finding myself, is never belonging to any one group, but sort of being in between the different groups. I was the rebel in my family, but I was trying to, I mean, so the movement I was raised in was called the Oxford Group in the 1930s. It's the thing that Alcoholics Anonymous grew out of. It became later known as moral rearmament. So it had it had cultic aspects, and it was involved in conflict resolution in industry and so on. And the people on the left in the trade union movement and so on, who were trying to, as it were, promote the conflict in industry in order to gain better wages and conditions and so on. Some of them really liked this conflict resolution approach, and others hated it. So I got involved as a student with very left student movement, and they knew of this movement and they hated it. So in my family, I would be defending that movement to my parents and trying to explain why people didn't like what they were doing and what actually was wrong with it. And then in that movement, among my student left friends, I would be saying, no, don't you understand? Actually, these people are doing conflict resolution. It's really important work. You've got to understand the value of it. So it was that sort of thing. And it was very hard to, I don't know if I convinced anybody on either side. And I kept trying to have that sort of conversation with my father, who was one of the leaders of this movement, right up until I only really gave up when he got Alzheimer's, and I thought, that's it, okay. But I kept at it, and that was probably the wrong thing to do. I probably should have just accepted that, but I felt that it was disrespecting him not to actually continue to sort of struggle with him with as much love and empathy as I could possibly provide. So I know that difficulty of trying to struggle with somebody while having empathy for them, it doesn't necessarily work. I don't know that it worked with my father. I mean, we did restore love between us. That definitely happened. So that worked. But I don't think he ever understood what I was talking about. So that didn't work.
It seemed like you were kind of looking for connection with all sides.
Yes. Yes. There's great pleasure in that. And I want to understand. I want to understand what's going on with people.
Well, there's, the term empathy, there's actually quite a few different definitions of it. And it can get kind of academic, talking about definitions of things. But is there some kind of way that you define empathy?
I think it's feeling with. So that it's like, I mean, ultimately, to really feel empathy with someone, I need to be able to tell their story and to feel what they felt when they were going through that story. So it's telling the narrative, telling their story, feeling what they were feeling during it. That doesn't mean that I have to feel, in a sense, have to take that on myself. It's not that I have to agree with them. I just have to understand how they felt. So there's a feeling dimension. It's not just a cognitive thing. There is a cognitive thing, which is understanding their story, but there's a feeling thing as well. So you have to open your heart enough to get the pain or joy that they were in.